I just don't understand. This is another thing. I don't. People slate Microsoft and Office and things like that, but then you go and try doing the same thing with like Google Workspace or Zoom's like meeting and calendar and blah blah blah. And it's they're just abysmal. They just have no idea of kind of user acceptance testing and stuff like that. It's just they're terrible. Anyway. Hello and welcome. My name is Richard Simon. I am Cloud Therapist. This is the February 2025 episode of Cloud State of Play. Well, we are a few months into the year and things are definitely hotting up already on lots of different fronts. Acquisitions, open source chaos, cloud computing, and Gen AI, all well underway with lots of really interesting things happening. But to help us focus things and to calm all the nerves, I have, as always, the vibrant Paul Bevan with me back again. Paul, can you do your own intro this month, please?
Can I do my own intro?
Yeah, I always do the intro for you. And so
okay. Yeah, it's great. It's great to see you. I mean, yeah, what am I? I'm just a research analyst for a company called Blur, and I'm a bit of a geek, but nowhere near as technical as my friend Richard here. So my background has been a long time in the industry, and but now I just sort of put my brain to try and work out what the hell's going on in the cloud world.
Indeed, and I'm nowhere near as technical as some other people, so I'm kind of passing that compliment down. So, Paul, what does Blur Research do?
So we're an IT analyst, and I'll have to wash my mouth out with soap after this, but we're sort of like a mini Gartner.
Nice.
So, I mean, basically we act as let's call it the bridge or the channel between vendors and end users. Trying to make sense of the technology world for end users, but also for vendors to say, come on, understand what the hell the customer wants, not what you are making. So where that sort of and we have a program called the Navigator program, which is almost like a consultancy approach to help people through that. But no, otherwise we write research reports, and do a whole load of stuff. I'm just trying to understand what's going on, look forward a bit. So these conversations are great. I mean, I've learned more about cloud in the last 2 or 3 years talking with you and going through these sessions than perhaps if I'd been sort of driving it myself, because you can see from the state of my grey hair that I've come from a very different world that you sort of wind me up about every now and again, and I won't mention mainframes, but
no. Unfortunately, mainframes is not on our free topics for today. But what we do have for you for this month in terms of our free topics is, let's go to the first one, different clouds. So we're going to be looking at the ecosystem that really makes up all of the sort of cloud types, if you like, and just seeing what's out there. So that's the first topic. Second topic is we came across a report or an article on Meta's global infrastructure design. So I picked up an interesting article that talked about Meta, or basically Facebook's parent company, holding company, talking about their hyperscale data center infrastructure. So we're going to dive into that a little bit, get Paul's take on that. And then the third one is an interesting open letter from the CEO of Docker. It's about shift left, and it's talking about, it's called Great Soundbite, Bad Outcomes. So I'm looking forward to diving into that. Interesting pushback, really, on the whole sort of shift left movement, if you like, and sort of the coming maybe from a little bit of an unexpected source. I would really kind of expect that to be a supporter of such movements, but there you go. So interesting to get that, and that's why we've got it as a topic. Okay, so those are our 3 topics. Now, Paul, let's dive into the first topic, which is different clouds.
Mm.
So this was based on two things that you and I think, had a conversation with. Prior to Christmas, we had a long discussion around multi-cloud. And I think we went around in circles a little bit around that, talked about some of the other stuff around that hybrid cloud and various other things. I think coincidentally at the same time, there was an interview. Is it SiliconeANGLE?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
SiliconeANGLE was at the AWS reInvent Summit 2024 last year.
Yeah.
And they were interviewing somebody from Emma Cloud, I think.
Yep.
And somebody from Deloitte. So I think we're kind of going to combine our conversation around those two. It's kind of that chat that I had with Paul sort of prior to Christmas, and also, like I said, coincidentally picking up on the interview at reInvent as well. So the first thing I picked up was from the interview itself, and we'll dive back into the different clouds in a minute, or different types of clouds. The multi-cloud definition by SiliconeANGLE was introduced as being, and I quote, multi-cloud is a distributed computing environment. Now, I thought we'd done away with DCEs back in the 90s. So that was the term that came in when we were kind of the rise of x86, when server computing was moving away from the mainframes and the mid-range, or let's say diversifying into kind of the the kind of the cheaper, maybe, if you like, the x86 commodity type of service. So that was the first thing that I picked up. And then he went on to say, some call it a super cloud, some call it a multi-cloud. Now, those two things are not the same for me.
Not the same.
Yeah, and I see that you're shaking your head as well. So that's completely wrong. But I mean, the chap who's kind of doing the interviews as a journo, so I'm not really holding too much against him in regards to that. But they're definitely not the same thing, as you probably know, our dear audience. So yeah, they didn't seem to really get that. And then the rest of the interview was kind of trying to really sort of, land on where multi-cloud is and hybrid cloud and things like that. But what was your take on that sort of 20-minute chat, Paul?
Well, again, people are struggling to do two things, I think. One is to differentiate themselves from everybody, let's say from the three big hyperscalers. They're always trying to find their niche. I mean, that's a general, everybody's trying to find their niche, and everybody's trying to almost invent new categories. Or they take an existing category, and this is what happened, I think, in that particular presentation chat, that went on, was that they basically miscategorize and misunderstand the terminology. So they start talking about it, and to me, multiple clouds, it's not multi-cloud. Almost feels like one transaction works on in an application, goes to AWS, and one goes to Azure, and another one goes to GCP. And the reality, of course, is it's not like that at all. Quite often they will use multi-cloud or multiple clouds. Sometimes because of latency issues, and they're thinking, actually, if I'm trying to service, Pacific region, Asia Pac, then I'd be better to go through GCP or Azure rather than AWS, because they can see that the routes that are being taken provide better latency, if you're trying to do that. So they might say, well, I'm going to have a particular region covered by AWS and a different region covered by one of the others, simply on the grounds of the actual the underpinning networks and the routing of traffic amongst them gives them a slight advantage. But I mean, you say slight advantage. And the other, of course, is resilience. If AWS runs into a problem, I can switch it to GCP or wherever. Now, the reality is, how often you might lose a region, but you're probably not going to get the whole of AWS going down. So to me, it's a sort of management decision to say, I'm going to share the load out across different applications. And there'll be different types of application that seems to run well in GCP, right? GCP were very much around AI and that to start with. Whereas AWS is probably a little later to the party on that.
Yeah.
So there's lots of decisions why you would have multiple clouds, but I don't see any very little use of switching between them, almost on the fly. It's just not happening, and they were trying to, and hence the sort of super cloud bit. Oh well, we've got to.
Yeah.
But they got that wrong too.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, just looking at the kind of the definition of that, I think the approach, if you're going to kind of talk about hybrid clouds and multi-cloud and whatever, for organizations, it really needs to be part of a strategy that you're consciously making a decision to be in more than one cloud.
Yeah.
So even multiple clouds and multi-cloud is different. Multiple clouds just means there's several clouds out there, and you could be using one or more potentially of them. Multi-cloud is actually sort of having that commitment as part of your strategy to be in more than or two or more clouds essentially, and that is for some of the reasons that you listed, and potentially some other ones. Now, when it comes to interconnectivity between your workloads in those clouds, that is, I think, where cross-cloud would come in. So whether it's if you're crazy enough to run one workload on multiple clouds, so you're kind of gone from just using two different clouds or more, that's your multi-cloud, to a cross-cloud sort of approach. So if you're crazy enough to want to do that, or maybe just at the very least a exchange of services between an exchange of information between the multiple clouds that you have, the multi-clouds that you have, but you're not actually spreading one workload across multiple clouds. So I think that would all fall into multi-cloud for me. It's part of your strategy. You're running on two or more public clouds or whatever type of clouds, and they happen to be and your workloads happen to be either spread across those, one workload spread across those, like I said, is maybe not recommended, or at least part of your strategy is to kind of fail over to another one or run different services in another one, and maybe they exchange data sometimes, or they're looking at it from the other side, they're observed by one platform. So that's kind of one observability platform looking at both of those clouds or more as well. So that, I think, would fall into, for me, that would, all of those things, all those activities would fall into a multi-cloud approach.
I don't disagree with anything you've said there, other than to say I don't think multiple clouds are any different. I think it's terminology. I know you maybe have a slightly different take on that. I can't see it, I must admit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just multiple clouds is just multiple clouds. There happens to be a number of multiple clouds out there, and that's kind of the recognition of that. But like I said, when you actually start wanting to use those, then they become part of your multi-cloud strategy, and that's because you're approaching public cloud or cloud in general as a multi-cloud strategy. And then, as we said, that kind of breaks down into what we just described. So kind of I just looked at, actually, as part of that interview, I did look at Emma Cloud, or whatever they call themselves, or Emma in general. So they're calling themselves a cloud management platform, empowering cloud choices as their website. So it's kind of enable instant connectivity across cloud environments to seamlessly deploy, test, and navigate multi-cloud and hybrid, presumably cloud, solutions. So I don't know whether they're offering kind of that super cloud kind of functionality, and we'll maybe come to that in a moment, or they're kind of more the the Megaport and Aviatrix type, where they're kind of doing the cloud networking aspect of it, or just
I think they're the former.
purely observability. I really don't know.
I think it's the former. I certainly don't think they're in the sort of Megaport Aviatrix camp at all. I think this is very much they're trying to use an abstraction layer above the cloud, aren't they, to give you that sort of ability to move between and then manage. I don't see that as a cloud. It's just an abstraction layer above it to give you a level of observability and management control. The question is, in this day and age, have we got over some of the gotchas that existed, particularly in Kubernetes? Slightly different implementations of Kubernetes on the three major cloud providers.
So maybe I should have scrolled down on their website a little bit more, because they do explain it a little bit more further down. So they say connect, deploy, manage, optimize, and govern multiple clouds, multi-cloud environments or hybrid cloud environments. So, and I like the fact that they actually do recognize the difference between multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. So that's a good point there, because I've seen other people, and we'll maybe come to it, where it says we're now in a hybrid multi-cloud environment. I'm going, please stop. Multi-cloud is fine, and hybrid cloud is fine. Don't combine those two. It just doesn't make any sense at all. But they do. So Emma Cloud, or Emma as in short, they do have a deploy option. So it says deploy infrastructure and services across hybrid and multi-cloud environments. Okay, so they are a super cloud kind of capability, I guess, in that sense, but not really the way that I think the interviewer was using it or defining it, because I think that those are two different things.
I do think the term super cloud is misleading, and you're just going to confuse end users, particularly. What the hell's a super cloud? It's a management layer, abstracted management layer above that. Okay, they've got the deploy, so you can build into maybe a DevOps approach that says, yes, I can deploy to multiple different locations, but you're still deploying to clouds. It's not another cloud. I get completely wound up.
And I would, and I agree with you on that definition for super cloud. And I think that's actually a really good point to make, in that where a super cloud is not necessarily a yet another cloud, and then you go into that cloud to go and address the other clouds that are underneath it, so to speak. So it's not another hierarchical sort of layer of cloud on top of the current ones that we're using.
And I know your sort of love of marketing departments, but and I'm a marketer, but I don't.
So you keep reminding me all the time.
I want to slap those people who come up with some of these terms. I would do.
Too.
Because that's a bad name. And you just think, and when services companies start saying they've got a cloud, you go, yeah, really? I just lose the plot at that point.
Yeah. So just as we were kind of talking a little bit about supercloud. So I think supercloud is kind of, as we said, it's a set of tools or services or sort of platforms that we can use. So apart from Emma Cloud, or Emma as they call themselves, there's things like Stack Guardian as well. So I will be providing, by the way, links to all this stuff as well in the description. So do check that out. But you can go to Stack Guardian. They essentially do the same thing as Emma does. They deploy on multiple clouds. If you have a multi-cloud environment or a hybrid cloud environment, they can do that for you. There is also CNCF projects that you can look at. So things like Pulumi, Crossplane. I'm sure there's others. Those actually do that kind of functionality as well. For a full view of how you can kind of look at migrating to cloud and using cloud and the different stages of migration to cloud, check out my video with Tracy Bannon from last year, and we go through all of the details on this sort of the journey to cloud. So I'll again make that available somewhere on the screen, certainly some links in the description on that. But yeah, I think that's kind of super cloud sort of tools. So Emma, okay, fine. Stack Guardian, some of the CNCF projects lend themselves to that. And that's kind of really certainly part of it. Now, the other one which has been mentioned again, and it does come up, is we're kind of talking about different types of clouds. We've talked about, I think, private cloud in the past. We know what public cloud is. We just talked about sort of multi-cloud. We also explained a little bit about cross-cloud. We've come across polycloud in the past, which you, I think, came across, and you're shaking your head, but we did discuss that as well, I think, last time. I will try and make that link. I think we had it in a state of play at some point. There was an interesting discussion, but it's actually a valid thing. I mean, I kind of was a bit cynical when you mentioned it, but then I kind of thought about it and went, actually, it sounds like it's another option.
It's another, but it's too like multi-cloud. I mean,
it's quite close. It is quite close. I agree. Very close indeed. And then you have things like edge cloud, and that's kind of really essentially taking the cloud services to sort of an edge type of environment and whatever you're going to be, running. Now, I think for me, edge cloud, makes sense if you do it in a particular way and use certain types of, or use a certain type of software stack, I think. So if you use the hyperscalers, public cloud providers sort of software stack, then for me, that's a kind of an edge cloud. Now, normally we talk about edge computing. I think that's the normal term that people use, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually running in a cloud sort of environment or it's part of a wider cloud necessarily. But certainly edge cloud, I think for me, would need to have those types of services maybe for in order to qualify.
My sense, there's two things that I'm saying. Firstly is that if you look at outposts from AWS, or you look at Azure Stack or whatever as the sort of means of taking that stack out to an edge location. The edge is not very close to the edge. These are sort of, there's now terms like near edge and far edge, and you think, oh my God. And so, but we're not actually seeing a great uptake, I think, of outposts and Azure Stack at this point. But I agree with you that if they're still using the exact same stack, but out at a different location, you get away with it. But edge cloud further out, no, it's and again, you go back. I've actually printed out the NIST definition of cloud that they put together in 2011, and it's actually still relevant. And it's and you look at it from an edge perspective. You go, actually, you can't have cloud at the edge because you can't provide the sort of scalability. All the sort of, as you can provide some of the tools. I mean, I had a conversation with a vendor about. It must be 2 years ago now, and they were talking about edge cloud right out at the edge in factories. And you're going, how do you get scalability? Well, we've got vans that are ready to drop off new servers. Oh God. It was like, they had a lot of the management tools. They were using some of the stack in terms of the sort of tools that were available, but it was this, at the edge like that, how are you going to scale it if you suddenly get, a surge in the requirement for processing at a let's say a warehouse or a manufacturing plant? And when he came back with we've got a fleet of vans that could deliver a loaded server inside 24 hours, you go, yeah, right, okay, that is not cloud.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking at it like that, you could potentially, my definition of that sort of edge cloud would be having to use, as we said, those hyperscaler tools. So AWS Outposts, Google Anthos, Microsoft's Azure Stack, or whatever they call it. I think they've changed the name recently, but essentially that kind of extension of the public cloud and physically running that somewhere. So with that, you could technically, although I probably wouldn't agree to kind of officially use it, but technically you could call, if you run those in your own data center, then your data center becomes an edge cloud, an extension of that public cloud. But you could take that, as we said, you could take that into a factory, you could take that into a construction site, a remote educational facility building or whatever it is, whatever your edge is, and whatever was served by things like hyper-converged infrastructure and a WAN connectivity in the old days and still running vSphere at that edge and so on. That's now has the potential to run things like Outposts and Anthos and Azure. Now that's not an IoT. I think IoT is yet another layer within that environment that will then feed into that, essentially that edge cloud, whatever those services are.
Can you make the IoT gateway? I mean, most of these IoT systems and real edge systems have what every IT person would recognize as a server somewhere, which is a gateway, and it acts as the concentrator and pulls them together. But I still say that even if you're using Outposts or Anthos or whatever, some of the key elements of cloud computing, like complete elasticity, pay for use type things, really difficult to deliver out at that point at the far edge, really, and that's with and I talk about the gateway, the IoT gateway. It's somewhere if you like, classical compute and software starts to play, whereas beyond that into the operational technology, OT, and then the IoT stuff, then you're in a different world. You can't make that cloud.
No, I mean, I think definitely the IoT aspect of it, isn't and doesn't need to be. And in fact, if anything, it needs to get smaller and start using things like WebAssembly, for example, and not running virtual machines or containers or anything like that. I think that's actually too big for.
I mean, you look at the stuff I was sharing with you from Ubuntu, from Canonical. They're focused on trying to deliver that much smaller, footprint, if you like, for servers and whatever, right out at the edge, stripped right back, but with enough of the sort of recognizable tools that cloud native people will understand. And it comes back to my the thing I've said a number of times is I split cloud into two. Firstly, it's there's this whole set of tools and processes and techniques that have enabled what's happened today in the cloud. The cloud native tool sets that are out there that have enabled the cloud. And the other is it's a consumption model. And if you get that in your head and say, how can I deliver a consumption model like that out there? You can't. It's a straight answer.
So the only other point I think to make in regards to the hyperscalers sort of extended cloud sort of services, as we said. So we talked about Outposts, we talked about or mentioned Anthos and Azure Stack. So AWS, I think, are the only ones taking that further, and they actually made some announcements recently in regards to that. And they've had things like EKS Anywhere, for example, for over a year now. I think that was announced in 23 and was made available last year. I actually did a talk with what was the conversation I had? Yes, it was actually on EKS Anywhere with John Hammond from AWS last year. Again, I'll try and drop the link in the description of the video for that short talk that I did with him, and we were talking about EKS Anywhere. There is also newer ones which they announced at reInvent last year. So EKS Auto Mode, which allows you to auto provision with a single click, and presumably you can script that if you want. And then something else called EKS Hybrid Nodes, which is actually allowing you to attach your on-premises and edge infrastructure as nodes to EKS clusters. So that makes it a lot more interesting in terms of the way that that's actually served. And for me, that would really put itself in that edge cloud kind of approach, in that edge cloud sort of format, if you like, that type of cloud. So all of that, I think, is a little bit more, I think, from at least AWS in terms of kind of lending itself to those sorts of areas. Okay, so the last one I wanted to touch on these kind of different types of, I've kind of gone around the houses a little bit on this, just briefly on hybrid cloud. Now, we've talked about hybrid cloud in the past, and maybe we kind of differ in terms of sort of what that actually means. I can see you positioning yourself, getting ready for the fight.
I'm ready to go.
ready to go. Here we go. Let's get ready to rumble. Okay. So hybrid cloud for me is, the ability to have, multiple clouds, and in this case, the definition is a public cloud as well as a private cloud, and that's a combination of those two. That's essentially a hybrid cloud. And what you're doing in order to actually make it, so you not just have those two and you just say, oh yeah, I'm in the public cloud and I also have some stuff, in my data center, and it happens to be, EKS Anywhere or Azure Stack or whatever it is, or even VCF from VMware or Nutanix, God forbid, or something like that. So those would be two separate things. That for me is not a hybrid cloud. The hybrid cloud bit comes in when the two are actually doing something together. It can be something extremely trivial or something extremely heavy in terms of the symbiosis between those two clouds. And I think that for me is when they're separate, it's a private cloud and a public cloud. When they're doing something together, it's a hybrid cloud. And I'm happy to kind of accept, like I said, the private cloud part of the hybrid cloud running different types of services. Maybe your public cloud application is running in the public cloud is actually pointing back to Active Directory, and that Active Directory happens to be your LDAP server that happens to be running in your private cloud. So that would kind of chain the two together, the private cloud and the public cloud, and then turn those two into a hybrid cloud. But if they're separate and they're not aware of each other and they never talk to each other, then that's not really a hybrid cloud.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. What I'm going to do.
Hey, we actually agree.
We agree. I'm going to read out from 2011 the NIST.
We don't need that.
Of the cloud, and it's very quick. The cloud, yeah. So hybrid cloud. The cloud infrastructure is a composition of two or more distinct cloud infrastructures. They say private, they had community back in those days, and public, that remain unique entities but are bound together by standardized or proprietary technology that enables data and application portability, e.g. cloud bursting for load balancing between clouds. So
okay, that's a bit old. It's a bit old. Yeah.
In the sort of 14.
I don't think anybody's bursting anything.
No, well, exactly. But they, if you look at some other topics later that sort of fall out in that, there are other areas where,
So read the. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just it's interesting that this thing. Can you just read that bit, that paragraph about the
bound together,
the bound together, just before the bound together bit. Yeah.
Yes. So distinct, that remain unique entities. So you've got, two different clouds.
Agreed.
But are bound together by standardized or proprietary technology. Well, I think the proprietary technology is probably gone. 14 years ago, they might have felt they had to say that, but today you're really saying standardized that enables data and application portability. Now that smacks of doing things in sort of almost like batch mode, Whereas I think what we're seeing is the ability to have certain parts of an application take advantage, but the other area that was mentioned in some of the things I've looked at says there's clearly around data, where you have data requirements. So I can't use the public cloud, but there are applications, and how do I, if you like, pass the data in from the private cloud to the public cloud to process that data and pass it back without the data ever residing in the public cloud. And so there are those. But I think the fundamental, what you talked about is right, that they are a standard set of tools that bind it together. It's not, I'm seeing over and over again people talking about hybrid cloud which was your earlier point about, they've got an on-premises legacy applications that have some sort of ability to pass data or communications to a public cloud.
Mm.
And I come back and this is where the sort of everything's got to be a cloud routine gets a little enticing. I'm saying that's hybrid infrastructure, not hybrid cloud. But I feel like Canute at times, sitting saying, tides, and I'm trying to tell people, and just as Canute was not being as daft as he sounded, he was trying to show his daft acolytes that he couldn't hold back the water. And I've had to say, I can't hold back the cloud, marketing hype, but it's not cloud.
Yeah, I mean, I think the portability, you mentioned portability, the word portability in that definition. Portability of data. And what was the other part that said portability of data and what?
No, it enables data and application portability.
Okay, right. So app and I mean, I think so. I think that it's kind of slightly outdated in terms of kind of where it's aiming, but I think the gist of kind of
the gist of it's
understand
still right,
a hybrid cloud to be there. And as long as, like I said, the two are exchanging something together, it doesn't have to be permanent. As long as they're exchanging something together, they're communicating in some way, and something goes from one side to the other and back, or vice versa. As long as that's happening, I think that's essentially a hybrid cloud. You don't need to burst necessarily to call that a hybrid cloud. You don't need to fail over from one to the other in order to call that a hybrid cloud. You don't need to kind of cross hybrid cloud, if you like, so actually run the same application or service on both, and it's live in both and it's running at the same time. You don't even need to do that. I think as long as security, storage related, so maybe an app in the cloud is referring back to a database back in the data center or something, that's enough in terms of a hybrid cloud definition. And again, on a software layer, ideally, maybe you should kind of consider running everything in the same sort of software stack. That would be better, because then you're dealing with one software stack rather than multiple, one set of tools, one set of abstractions for things like observability, automation, blah, blah, blah. But if you're not, it's not ideal, but it is there. And I think that's fine. I'm okay with that. I think just the crux of that is to make sure that you have that definition, I think, correct. The thing for me, I think, is I think I would aim, and if somebody says, oh, let's have a hybrid cloud, what's your definition of hybrid cloud? I would aim for that, same software stack. That's what I would aim for. Now, I appreciate not everybody's in that boat, but or people can't jump into that straight away. But that would be the ideal sort of. That's certainly what you should be striving for as well.
I absolutely agree, and I think our discussion around Meta will throw up some interesting insights into what you've just said.
Hey, if you are enjoying the content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would really help me out. Thank you. Let's move on to our second topic, which is the Meta's global infrastructure design. So this was an article. Did I point this out to you, or did you point this out to me? I can't remember.
You pointed it out to me.
Okay.
Then you had to come and unscramble my brains at the end of it.
Right. Okay. So oh, by the way, shout out to John Hammond, because he actually pointed me to this. So he posted something on LinkedIn about this. So shout out to John. Thank you, John, from AWS for pointing that out. John, we need to get together. We need to do some videos this year. We haven't done any videos yet. But shout out to him. Thank you very much, John, for highlighting that. It was an interesting article, definitely. And it's kind of focuses what, Paul? On the open, is it the OCI, the Open Compute Initiative?
Open Compute Project.
OCP. There we go. Okay.
I mean, they were very early into
adopters, right?
adopters of OCP, and they're big contributors. I mean, they right down to the infrastructure layer. You know, they've given definitions for racks and servers and God knows what into OCP that are becoming. OCP struggled to make them industry standard because so many of the other vendors out there don't want to play the same game. But but they've been great contributors to the open source and the OCP arena virtually since inception. I always find it strange that at the at the head man level they can be seen as the evil empire, and yet their technology stack is. They've been so good at developing stuff and putting it out into the open space. So that was a sort of a sideshow. I mean, it's not what this is about, because what they've been doing, it was, for me, it was mind blowing.
So let me just come in with a couple of points then. So the only OCP I knew before this, or before the Open Compute project, was the Omni Consumer Products, which is the fictitious company from Robocop. So that was the only other OCP that I knew. Because when I saw OCP, I went, "Oh, I didn't know they were actually." No, I was just joking. Of course, they're not a real company, but it was funny to see that they use the same acronym. The other point I wanted to make is I think all of this stuff from Meta is a complete scam, an absolute complete scam. Don't forget, Meta, and largely Facebook, is a software company. So all of the stuff that they do, all their algorithms, IP, and everything else is in the software stack. It's not in a hardware stack. So why shouldn't they open their hardware stack and make that available to everybody else? So in fact, why shouldn't they pass on some of the development to others to do it for them? Thank you very much. And then contribute a little bit towards the OCP themselves. So I think this whole, oh, look how open we are. Yeah, okay, show me your Facebook algorithm. Let's see how biased that is and things like that. So all of that stuff that they do, all their actual intellectual properties in their software stack, not in the hardware stack. If I was Meta, I'd be doing exactly the same thing. Doing the whole PR thing with the hardware side and saying, look how open we are and fantastic we are, and we open our projects and we show you what our racks are made of, and you want to contribute a little bit of technology to this open compute project? Sure. Okay, well, because we can make use of that as well. You did the research, you paid for it with your time and effort. And
I think you're being a little unfair in the sense that I think they do quite a lot of research into that.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do.
Put it together. So, but even before you've just had your little rant, the one thing that did occur to me when I was looking at that, and I always like to make connections into the non-IT world.
Yeah.
That it was very much taking what I call the Ryanair approach to standardization, lowest cost unit cost as possible, and actually driving out any inefficiencies in the system. That was what absolutely fascinating. They did make, and if you look at Ryanair's model, it is exactly that. They have one type of aircraft. Facebook have one type of server.
Oh yeah.
Until they get to AI, and then AI is rather sort of tip the apple cart up a little bit. They've got a single processor server with 256 gigabyte of RAM, or however much RAM. I can't remember the actual figure. And actually just scale out at pace. And the way in which they've architected and sort of used the management and development tools around it, I just think is we were talking about what should people be trying to work towards, and is that sort of cost effectiveness and flexibility they've got. I mean, they've given up. If you look, and this is where I struggle, even though I'm most salespeople think I'm a bit geeky, but clearly when I get into this,
it's rubbing off, Paul. That's why
I'm anything but. And you sort of get to the point where they're making trade-offs between the way in which they use their stack and the underlying hardware that sometimes gives them more complexity for the software to describe as they scale out. So I was just reading it. I mean, if you include this. I encourage people to read it. It is fascinating. But I agree with you. I mean, there's a sense, which why it was such a sort of strange, and you've sort of come down on the side of, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? That you've got at the top level this sort of, I call it the evil empire. It's sort of that's
Well,
if he could take over the world, he would, and he keeps it very quiet about what he's doing. So I get that, but I actually genuinely thought as a sort of blueprint for how companies could look to make themselves more effective in the cloud and hyperscale environment, or in their own way. There's a lot of learning in there, which I think people should take. If Facebook are putting it out there, take it, read it.
I agree, and I'm not disputing the, if we just look at OCP and look at what Meta's doing, clearly, of course, all the other hyperscalers do the same thing as well. So they all have their own takes. Whether they make them publicly available or not, that's their business. But the point being is that everybody else is doing the same thing as well. They want to be, they want to make their hyperscale data centers as optimized and as sustainable, and so on. And if you are running, one application essentially, then you would make that whole, infrastructure that runs that application as efficient and as uniformed as possible, and so on. So let's say we're just looking at Meta's Facebook, data centers, right? Hyperscale data centers. Yeah, I would expect them to all be one CPU, 256 gigs of RAM, whatever, blah blah blah, on those. Absolutely.
You were talking about huge scale and global scale, and what they do in terms of resiliency. If there are problems, and the way in which they can load balance, the way in which they can switch, and a lot of it is software driven, and they try and abstract as far as possible. And every now and again, they get to a position where actually they need to do something different with the hardware, and therefore the software stack becomes more complex. But the point they did make, and I think you sort of about to touch on it, was the hyperscaler, the cloud providers, as opposed to providing their own, have a different challenge in the sense that they can't provide a single, scale out type server environment, because they've got multiple different customers. And the guy said they owned up that, said, yeah, we're in a great position here.
Yeah.
But again, one of the things that absolutely was enforced from the top is standardization.
Yes. Yeah.
No groups of sort of operators and technicians having their own tool sets. This is what you will use. So it is a very top-down approach to that. I mean, because most organizations you go to, we've talked about tool sprawl before, and trying to stop that tool sprawl has proven to be culturally very difficult.
Yeah,
Facebook enforced it.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously there's a clear distinction between how a hyperscaler runs their business and how a standard enterprise normal sort of organization does. But certainly I see that normal average everyday sort of organizations can benefit from seeing how streamlined and so on. I mean, I've been in this situation where I used to work likes of IBM, Lenovo and so on, and we would be shipping something to a customer and we'd say, you know what, we couldn't get the extra 128 gigs of RAM for you, so it's going to come, there's a shortage, or this, I don't know, something's happened, the solar flare or something's exploded, whatever it is, a dispute in China, whatever it is, we can't get it to you. It's a short ship. We have a short ship on our hands. Rather than the customer saying, okay, we'll wait, they would say, okay, we'll just take it with 128 gigs of RAM, and then when you get the other 128 gigs of RAM, we'll upgrade the server. So now you've got, from the previous shipment, now you've got a disparity between your configs. And you'd end up with that all over your data center. And customers would just accept that because, that's what they had to run with, or there was no governance in place that says, no, sorry, they've all got to be 256 gigs of RAM. If IBM can't provide it, go and speak to Dell. Everybody's, multi-sourced in those environments anyway. So I can see that, yes, normal enterprises can benefit from looking at how Facebook does it, and maybe even adopting, going for OCP, solutions. That's fine. I haven't got a problem with that at all. Like I said, Meta's not the only ones obviously doing this. Everybody else does it. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they all do it in their hyperscale data centers. Yes, I also acknowledge the point about, now that they have to do AI workloads and both training and inference stuff, you have to account for things like GPUs and so on. And I'm sure the OCP standard will expand to include that, at some point, if they haven't, done so already. I haven't really looked at it for probably well over 10 years. But my point still remains is that this is no skin off Meta's nose at all. This is no impact on them at all. They don't really care about the hardware. They just, if they said, look, the only supplier in the world is, Hynix or it's HPE or Dell that sells, the only supplier in the world that Dell servers, sells servers is Dell, they just go to Dell and buy it from Dell, right? And you can't make it yourself. It's too difficult, or it's impossible to do, or Dell offers something unique, whatever the reasons. And if you if the focus was only on one manufacturer, they would just go to them, because they don't care about the hardware aspect. They want to make it as efficient as possible, and they'll probably pressure that manufacturer, as our customers used to do at IBM and Lenovo. They would pressure us all the time and say, well, why 5 fans? That's taking up my, wattage usage. Can we not run on 4 fans? It'd be all sorts of crazy stuff we'd be doing with BIOS and firmware tweaks and things like that to make it run, in the way that the customer really wanted it to run. So, I don't really see anything that Meta is doing here that is, of kind of this. I don't know. It's not a philanthropist sort of thing. I think this is a PR stunt, as far as I'm concerned, because they could have just kept it, behind closed doors and just said, "We'll just make it as efficient as possible," not really opened it up, and nobody would have really complained about it. I mean, nobody's complaining to Google, Microsoft, or Amazon for doing the same thing but keeping it closed. So
they've absolutely got good PR out of it, but I mean, they've made a feature, if you like, of the way in which they use or abuse, if you think of it, the open source, open community, OCP community. I don't necessarily think they abuse it. I mean, I think they've seen it as a way of getting to that really low cost, very. So they're business people, for goodness sake. But what I think was interesting was that, there are areas of, both in terms of the way in which they manage the sort of scalability and the resource usage and the sort of how do I avoid downtime, all those sort of issues that I think ordinary enterprises, without anywhere near the scale of these guys. I mean, that was the other thing that blew my mind was, the scale of the number of servers, the number of switches. I mean, it's just in the millions. And of course, you start thinking, jeepers, how do you manage that? So, and if they allowed tool sprawl, they would collapse overnight, But there's a risk. There is a risk if you go down a route where you absolutely standardize on one thing, and that is that standard you're using is no longer available. You can come back to Ryanair. They absolutely use the same model of Boeing aircraft all the time. Now, the state of Boeing, you're going to Ryanair, shouldn't you be thinking about, and actually they find it very difficult to move away from that because they're so cost focused. And I think that's what's going on there. And as you say, there is that conundrum between them being very open and having this very closed environment, evil empire bit at the top. Mark Zuckerberg, would like to rule the world, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I did a lot more research on the subject. There was some stuff from associationofresearch.org and various other ones. So I will try and include as much of this in the description of the video, guys. If not, it'll be probably in a comment, because there was a ton of stuff there that I dug up. And this was all around sort of the technology and the infrastructure that they actually use. I looked at their storage, looked at the way that they actually optimize all of that. So it was things like, obviously talked about things like custom hardware, high performance processors, and scalability and other things as well. And then looked at the kind of the storage models. So they went from what was it, the Tectonic, that's the exabyte scale distributed file system that they use, hybrid columnar format, DWRF. That was again for their what was that for, AI and various other types of efficient storage and retrieval, and lots of other stuff.
Very much, I'm focused on serverless as well. I was, again, you know, that their sort of future direction is serverless. You know, going back 5 or 10 years, you'd have gone, that's a brave approach, but of course, obviously, it's really grown up since then.
Yeah, it was. I think Facebook Open Switching System. I think FBOSS was another one that I dug up as well around their networking switches and so on. So lots of stuff. There was lots of stuff in there, and this wasn't just that. Like I said, the article, there was a bunch of other articles that I picked up as well. Actually, even from engineering.fb.com was also talking about some of the stuff that they actually use. So lots of research there. Like I said, I maintain that this is all a PR stunt. You know, it's no skin off, you know, Facebook's or Meta's nose. Their focus is not really hardware. Their focus and their IP is all in the software. That's where their algorithms reside, and that's where their real money is. So they want to do this. They want to open it up and call it OCP, whatever they like, Omni Consumer Products or whatever it is. That's fine by me, but it doesn't really impress me at all.
The OCP community might be a little hurt by that, but never mind.
That's fine. That's fine. Bring them on. Hey, if you are enjoying the content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would really help me out. Thank you. Let's move on to our third topic, which is an even more interesting topic. So this was an open letter by the CEO of Docker. Paul, no, what was his name? Scott Johnston. Yeah, not Paul Bevan. Paul Bevan's right there.
Scott Johnston.
Yeah, Scott Johnston, CEO of Docker, and he wrote an open letter in regards to shift left or shifting left. What was your view? We'll go into a little bit of the detail there, but just kind of describe briefly what he was saying, Paul.
It was very strange, but it was sort of, I got the sense that he hadn't quite joined the party in terms of what shift left was supposed to be about from a cultural perspective. You know, the idea of shift left being getting everybody involved early in the development cycle, so that you try and sort of, you know, get all the issues out on the table early and get them sorted out, and everybody knows what's going on. And I've maybe described that very badly, but I've got, you know, and I've said this in our CSOPs in previous months, where I think, you know, the term DevOps, it has become capital DEV and a very small OPS. You know, and here was the complete counter to that, which was really saying, you've put all the pressure onto the developers, and all the other operational people and all the other security people keep asking and telling, you know, stuff and trying to pull stuff, and all you're doing is overloading the developers.
Yeah,
you know, it was almost like, hence the sort of shift left, you know, great soundbite, but bad outcomes for developers.
Yeah.
You know, and we've had this debate before. This is the developers. What do developers want to do? They want to develop. They don't want to get involved in this whole other area. It's not in there. So he then tries to justify it by bringing in the Japanese Kanban, you know, environment. You know, the Toyota production system. Fascinating, lovely, very good, and actually doing a bit of work behind it. There's quite a lot of software development teams now use the Kanban board. Not saying they use the whole of the system, but they're certainly using that sort of workflow board to help them identify where, you know, where there are bottlenecks in the system, you know. But the idea, and he put this in the article that said, you know, in the sort of Toyota system, anybody spotting a fault on the production line can stop the production line, whether you are the sort of, the not quite the person wielding the broom, but I mean, very nearly. As it passes you on the production line, if you spot a fault, stop it, fix it there, get everybody together and say, where's the problem? And then you sort of can say, right, how do, and that's fine. And Scott in his article was saying, actually what, it was almost saying it's the developers that need to do that. And then the developers are going to look at all the sort of, what's the root cause analysis? Yeah, fine. But if if the problem happens further on in the development process, as you're getting into operationalizing what's going on, you can't have the developer saying, hold on a minute, just spotted that's gone on over there. So I think he was trying to use the analogy too far, but to me, it came across as, shift left didn't work because the flipping operations people, and the security people have made the developers' life hell. We need to go to a developer first environment. Yeah. So I can take the cynical hat now going, yeah, of course you want to do that. But when he started to get into, developers can stop the run at any point, you're going, no. If you get to security or you get to an operator and they see an issue that you need to work back, they stop it and bring everybody in. There's a lot of this, the whole issue of sort of Kaizen, constant improvement, Kanban. He talked about Kanban. He talked about, was it the Gemba mandate. Go to the Gemba mandate. And I thought, not heard that one before, and did some digging around. And he's sort of mangled that a little bit. Gemba is the place where in the Toyota world, you go to it, you go to the place, you see what's happening, and you fix it. So the Gemba's a place. And I could not find anything about a Gemba mandate that says now you stop everything. So he was mangling it a bit, but fundamentally what he was coming back to was, no, it's developer first. It was almost like, stop hitting us with all this stuff from the sort of shift left. But fundamentally, and the last piece, he was arguing that there was too much pull going on from the right-hand side, and getting in the way of doing the development. And actually, Kanban itself is a right to left process. It starts with, what's the outcome that you want? What's the output? And you move things to the point you've got nothing left in your visible stack of jobs to be done, and it's all got to the end, but that end is what you put up first. So it's almost like, the way you're talking about it, you just leave developers to do their own stuff and hope it reaches the end okay. I just struggled with it, I must admit.
Yeah, you should see the Kanban for my cloud therapist channel. That's all I'm going to say. So I got Copilot to kind of summarize the thing for me. They came back with a fairly decent sort of I think paragraph on it. So it said, so this kind of the details of it. Obviously we'll provide links to you guys to have a look at. But it says Scott Johnson, the CEO of Docker, addresses the drawbacks of the shift left approach that has overburdened developers with additional tasks and cognitive load. Instead, he advocates for starting with the developer, understanding their current tools and dependencies, and offering insights and suggestions to reduce risks. Johnston shares his excitement for Docker's pivot to being developer first, and highlights recent innovations like Docker Scout and Docker Test Containers Cloud. He also expresses enthusiasm for the potential of Gen AI to transform software development by automating tasks and improving developers' workflows, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of the summary, the synopsis. Now, I do agree that, we kind of, started a party called DevOps and forgot to invite the ops guys to it. And there has been a lot of shift left movements. Not that I necessarily agree with them. We've had things like DevSecOps, for example. We did the whole DevOps pipeline, then we forgot to actually check it for security. So we were, bringing in code from Stack Overflow and dodgy other sort of sources and never checked what it was actually doing. And then we found actually some of it was, as it was compiled and running on our servers, was actually doing some cryptocurrency mining somewhere in the background, because that was what it was. That's what that C program or JavaScript was Java code was actually doing. Platform engineering. So that's kind of been the more recent. Now, not everybody admits to it as being a shift left, but essentially it is a shift left, because you're, again, trying to take that burden away from developers of kind of standardizing, their platforms and things like that. And again, we've done platform engineering to death on the channel. So again, I'll try and point you some previous discussions that we've had on that in the past. And then, others have actually talked about things like DevOps modernization. So kind of how can we modernize DevOps itself? So not just take away that platform engineering piece out of it, but actually modernizing DevOps itself. The folks in the cybersecurity space have talked about shifting left their security, and everybody was kind of on this many years ago talking about it. So yeah, I mean, I don't think he's kind of really saying anything that we don't know and largely agree with. I think the problem is not all of these things necessarily, although like I said, I'm not necessarily in the shift left camp. I think I am in the camp in terms of what it's trying to do, but I'm not in his camp in terms of the way that it's doing it and not admitting what it's doing.
Yeah,
it's kind of just saying, oh, we're now going to do this thing called platform engineering. Why are you doing that? We won't say, but if you read certain articles, which I will try and share with you, it will say DevOps is dead, or we got DevOps wrong. But there's very few people who will actually admit that, will actually say that. And I even read an article the other day that said, platform engineering make or break. And I was thinking, whoa, hang on. I thought platform engineering was fixing DevOps. And now you're saying it itself is in peril. So yeah, I'm the approach, I think the idea is fine. Just admit it and do it and get on with it, rather than kind of say, now we're going to do this movement, without saying why you're doing that movement and why you're abandoning the previous approach. And again, like I said, we've discussed kind of DevOps versus platform engineering on the channel a number of times in the past. So I don't think there's anything new here. I'm not really seeing anything that's being said that we don't, like I said, we don't largely or that we largely or that we disagree with, but we largely agree with it. But the point is that you still need to go back to those fundamental points and say, why are you doing this? Why did we do this whole DevOps thing in the first place? I could see the benefits, but did we actually educate people? Did we actually get enterprises on board? Did we explain that it was going to be so hard to do this? And it was not just a technology shift, but a cultural shift,
yeah.
to do DevOps. And again, I had this conversation the other day, and again, we've discussed this kind of barrier of kind of getting into DevOps and reaching that, what I would call a stage 3 sort of migration, to cloud and cloud native and so on. So yeah, okay, I mean, you can do that, and you can mention a couple of other tools, new tools, and you kind of want to advertise those, Docker Scout and Docker Test Containers Cloud, whatever. That's fine. They're all there to enhance supply chain, SBOM, and stuff like that. But again, isn't that going to clash with, GitLab and Circle CI and all these other established players? Because they surely already do this in their pipelines.
I mean, you're never going to stop that sort of clash of different tools and different ideologies, even in terms of development. And I just felt the whole thing was, he was almost trying to tell ops and sec and everybody else to butt out. Butt out, guys. We're the developers. We start here. Never mind shift left. He says, we're so far left, we can't go anywhere else. We don't want you to join us. You know, if I was being really cynical, I think that's probably a bit a bit too far. But no, there was nothing particularly new. But again, his use of the Kanban and mangling some other parts of the Kanban process a little bit, I just, you know, as a non-IT guy, got me slightly sort of worked up.
Yeah, and it's like I said, so it's kind of extols the virtues of developers, and you know, kind of the we've talked, I think, before briefly. Let me just find the you know, developer burden and cognitive overload, and you know, blah blah blah. I think they, you know, I'm not sure what these developers are. They sort of soy milk drinkers or beta males or something. I'm not really sure, but I mean, we shouldn't be really wrapping people in cotton wool. I think.
Yeah, you're going neocon in your old age.
I am a little bit, yeah. So, well, the world's going that way, so we should really
move with the times.
Yeah, move with the times, Paul. Exactly. So, so I think the, you know, like I said, I agree with the sort of, you know, with the points, you know, that he's making, all those things clear as mud in certain areas of the letter. The overall sentiment I agree with, but you know, I don't know what makes developers kind of worthy of controlling all of these things and making these sort of decisions. I really don't. That's kind of the bit that I don't really agree.
Yeah.
I've never really seen that. Even when DevOps was kind of coming on board, I was probably against
the whole
it.
idea was that, as I read it, was DevOps. You know, you'd almost at the start of a project, you get everybody around the table, and everybody would understand, you know, where the risks were, what the issues were they needed to address early on, so that the developers, when they started to develop, didn't suddenly develop something that then had to be amended later on because they wasn't covering off some of the operational or risk or security angles that hadn't, you know, because developers are just going to go, oh, I want to, you know, do the latest greatest thing, you know, get off and do it, and never have to think about those. And you know, let's not revisit all that, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I think the developers started a party, called it DevOps, and they forgot to invite the ops,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
to the party. So, you know, and like I said, while he kind of seems to really have that sort of sympathy for developers, you know, and you know, them sort of getting dumped on so much, I don't necessarily really agree with that. I mean, you guys started this. You wanted to do DevOps, and now you're saying you're overburdened. And then you wanted to do DevOps, and now you're saying, but we can't really have the sort of that artistic approach to development. We need to standardize our tools with, you know, with things like platform engineering. You wanted to do DevOps, and then you said, but we forgot about the security bit. So we need to go shift left back into, you know, our pipeline, and then, you know, push security back at the beginning. We wanted to do DevOps, and then you forgot about your SBOM, and you wanted to do DevOps, and you forgot about your tool chain, and you know, and the supply chain, and so it's kind of just on, you know, it just seems to be a very ill thought way, an ill-advised, ill-conceived way of actually doing things, and then going back and saying, but you know what, we didn't do these things, or it's not really fair to, you know, to dump all of this on the developer. So here's some tools that will help you, right? Okay, and so how are you going to integrate these tools into someone who's committed to GitLab or someone who's committed to Circle CI? And they, don't forget, those guys also offer these types of things. And while you can kind of argue, you know, the details and the features and functions of each, and whether the, you know, the Docker Scout does the same thing, you know, as what GitLab does, or, you know, Docker's Test Containers Cloud, you know, does it, you know, as well as Circle CI's kind of secure. I don't know. That's, you know, that's horses for courses, I guess.
I think he wants, you know, it was almost like he wanted to be more relevant further along the pipeline.
I think he wants to have his cake and eat it.
Yeah.
Is my bottom line. And if you kind of, you know, if you kind of don't understand something, then, you know, don't change it in a kind of a knee-jerk reaction way.
Yeah. I mean, they've created something that's become a standard. It's almost become a commodity.
Yeah.
And I think that's his challenge. He's sitting in a commodity environment going, how do I play slightly higher up? I would say along the tool chain, but higher up in terms of value, because he's actually created, the one that everybody uses, but it's a commodity now.
And you know what it reminds me of? This whole sort of shift left and this sort of thing. Video games and games consoles in the past, when you bought a game, it came on a CD, it came on a cartridge or whatever, and you'd install it and you'd run it with all the bugs, all the problems, all the crap hidden line removal that it had, and all the sprite bugs and everything else that you had, and you just played the game as it was. You might get lucky that the next batch of the CDs or cartridges might fix a few things, but essentially you had to commit to that code, and you shipped that code once, and that was it. There was no patches, there was no opportunity for updates. When you got things like hard disk drives and SSDs and internet connections and Wi-Fi connections to the consoles, developers got lazy. They couldn't meet their deadlines because of the overbloated code and all the motion capture and all the other kind of perfection that they wanted to do in the games. So they just shipped it because they needed to meet the deadline for the shipping of the code. And they said, you know what, and we'll fix the patches later on. And essentially, that's what shift left feels like to me. You release your game today because you want to hit a deadline. The gaming community starts complaining about is glitchy, and the characters are falling out of the sky, and there's all sorts of problems that they report on the internet and Reddit and so on. And by the time they've got really heated about it, the software game house releases a patch for the game, and it gets installed on your console and hopefully fixes all of the problems that you're
I love the way you said hopefully. I mean,
because they don't. Some of them don't. Some of them had released patches and they still don't work.
This is as old as the hills in terms of, the development of the development of software process is that sort of, and whoever invented the term MVP, minimum viable product, needs to be taken out and shot.
Shot, yeah.
Because you see so many products where they're thinking, oh, this will do, this is MVP, it's great, without ever saying what is the minimum viable product to meet the needs and desires of your customers. And you just think, oh, for goodness sake, So yes, I'm on the hunt. If anybody can identify the person who first coined the term MVP, I think I'll be knocking on his door.
So it might have been Scott Johnston. Who knows? No, I'm sure it's not. I'm sure there's a lot more clever.
As long as he's not 6'6" and built like Jack, then I'll...
ex-SAS guy or something. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So, Paul, thank you ever so much, as always. Great insights, great conversation, great laughs. So I think we've kind of done as much as we can on these three topics. As we said before, descriptions or links in the description. There might be some extra notes in the comments, so do check that out if you're watching this later on. And let us know what you think about these topics. Feel free to drop us some comments, give us your thoughts as well. I really appreciate that. Paul and I always want to hear from you guys as our lovely audience. And are you thinking about these kind of topics? Are they affect you? How do you feel about them? Do you agree, disagree with them? Do you agree or disagree with us? We don't mind that either. So that's cool. It's always good.
All America.
Absolutely. All good debate. That's it for this month, and we will see you next time. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support me. You may also want to check out some of the other videos on this channel.